Couple things I want to stress here as we get started. One, if you see me looking off to the side, I have two screens going here, so I'm just double checking the display, but I'm going to try not to let myself get too distracted by that. But two is all totally optional. You're going to get out of this what you put into it, though. And so my expectation is you're starting to put in some time to review outside of school, not just once a week, 6 times or 5 times because of Memorial Day and hoping it's all good. You're putting in that time, leaving no doubt that you did what you could. That's the expectation. So as we get going here, have those packets that you picked up, highlight key stuff, write in notes. There's going to be stuff I say you should write it down because ultimately in the end, you're going to go back through and you're going to do some quick content review before your exam as you get closer. And hopefully you've written a few things down. If I say something that helps you remember something, do that, whether we're going over the practice questions or the content. So here we go. Let's just start right out with the French Revolution. So you should always, when you see a topic, think about the things you know already, okay? What are the causes of the French Revolution? The first thing, it's that tax system, and it's the inequality. Ooh, there's an enduring issue for you if you have to write about it. The French estate system. If you see something about the estates in France, it's about the French Revolution. Okay, so I'm going to talk about A first, but I'm telling you right now, start with B. Know that stuff, B, and then these Roman numerals here. Know that as well. I'm going to try to see, does it show up here? It doesn't. Okay, that's weird. Make sure you know that stuff. Be aware of it. Have an understanding of it so that you can come through. Here's the stuff here. I'll circle. I think it'll show up on your screen. Know these things too. Do you need to know the exact statistics? No, but roughly you should know. So there were economic problems. They were in a lot of debt, period. Just know that. They needed money. Well, how do you get money? You get money through taxes. That's how government gets money. The problem is the wealthiest people, the first estate and the second estate, paid no taxes. So they needed to figure out how to make that work. The third estate, who were the middle class and the peasants, they did pay this chief tax, right? And I give you the name of the chief tax. Good, a little detail to know, but guess what? Those are the details you go back and know after you have the basics down. So it's like building a house. Your foundation here about the French Revolution, we're going to do some causes. The foundation is this unfair tax system and economic inequality. And hopefully you can tell me who are in each of the states or like the rough population level. You know that. That's the foundation piece. Then you can add in other stuff. You can say, oh, the tally or the chief tax of France. Good little detail to know if you have to write about this. French Revolution makes a great writing task for a whole bunch of stuff. Conflict, inequality, right? Those sorts of things, the use of power, it works for all that. So it's there, but it also has been used as a short answer, those CRQ questions. We'll talk about that in a minute. So know that stuff, know this here, that it causes some problems. If you see this image on your Regents exam, and it is shown up again and again, and it is shown up as a document for enduring issues, I believe it has shown up as, in some way, shape, or form, an image like this, maybe not the exact same image, but an image like this has shown up on the CRQs as a explain the historical circumstances that led up to the image depicted in the cartoon, right? And you have to talk about the estate system of France and the first estate and the second estate, the third estate supporting the first and second estates. If you see an image like this on your exam, you should in your head go, this is about the French Revolution. We have the third estate supporting through its taxes, through its work and its labor, the first and the second estates who are up here. This guy is the first estate. How do I know this guy's the first estate? He's got a cross necklace on, so he is the clergy. This other guy over here, he is the nobility. He represents the second estate because he's wearing a fancy hat. So there you go. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in here. Bottom line, just know this is the French estate system. Okay, and it helps cause the French Revolution. Okay, so what are some causes? One thing I don't even have on here, and I probably should. So feel free to write it in. The fall of the Bastille. The fall of the Bastille. So I am going to put it right here. The fall of the Bastille is a it's a prison. They seize weapons from it. It just symbolizes the start of the revolution. That's why you should know it. The Bastille, start of the French Revolution. Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen. A lot of Enlightenment ideas in there, mirroring the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Men are born free and equal, and those sorts of things. You should definitely be aware that our friends Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI were executed by guillotine. Sometimes they'll give you a wrong answer that talks about an effective something about the French Revolution. It's like, oh, Louis XVI negotiated with, no, he didn't. His head got chopped off. So none of those answers are ever going to be right. You need to know he got executed by guillotine during the Reign of Terror, maybe the most important part of this. Whoop, that didn't even, it disappeared that quickly. The Reign of Terror. I'm not even going to try. That's an arrow. The Reign of Terror. So the thing I always pointed out to my students is we have Reign of Terror. What happened? That's the guillotine, people being executed. Reign of Terror. Robespierre. If you see his name, R for Robespierre, R for Reign of Terror. R for radicals, the most extreme group in France leading the French Revolution at this point during the Reign of Terror. Reign of Terror, chopping people's heads off with the guillotine. Just know that. Violence. That's what happened. Extreme elements in the Reign of Terror. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of that thing because we don't need it anymore. What are the results? Well, I just kind of give you a simple list here. Nationalism increases. Napoleon comes to power, right? The middle class gains more power. That sort of stuff. We're not going to spend a ton of time on the results. So again, basics, absolutely know the Reign of Terror. They've asked specific questions about it. Absolutely understand this estate system and that the first and second estate do not pay taxes, even though they had the most money. Even though they're only 3% of the population, they control a huge amount of the wealth of France. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk Napoleon now, just really quickly. The thing that comes up the most often with Napoleon, he invades Russia. We talk about another invasion of Russia. Well, the Soviet Union. There's a difference, but for us, we'll just say Soviet Union. Why does it go poorly for Napoleon? The same reason it goes poorly for Hitler. Now, there's other reasons too, we won't get into here, but for our purposes, Russia's huge. Its geographic size and its location. It's super far north, so it's big and cold. The Russian winter is brutal, and Napoleon ends up losing 90% of his army, his best troops, 90% of them, from his invasion of Russia, and it's his downfall, and it's ultimately why he ends up, ultimately why Napoleon ends up stepping down, losing power, and eventually being arrested and imprisoned. Okay, so now here we are looking at this. I'm going to move. There we go. I don't know if that mattered or not, but I don't want to be in the middle of this. Oh, okay. So this is a little bit different, but the same idea. First of all, we see, I want to remind you here, and I'm assuming you can see this, but if not, I'm circling the word estate. This is France. This is French Revolution. You should know that. Okay, that's number one. And then we've got the king. Okay, we didn't really totally address the king, but they were an absolute monarch, king, total power. Okay. The clergy, there's our first estate. The nobility, there's our second estate. And here they are supporting them again. And he looks like he's working so hard and straining under their weight. So Let's take a look. Number one, which claim is best supported by the information from this illustration? So questions like this will be on your exam. They absolutely will be. If you're one of my students, your warm-ups have had a question like this all year long, because there will be several questions like this on your exam. Which of the following can best be supported using this chart, graph, illustration, cartoon, quote, primary source document, whatever it might be, and you just take what's there and compare it. Now, sometimes you can also just go, yeah, that's not right. Okay. The clergy and nobles have the least amount of power. Well, here they are, just sort of chilling, fancy dressed, not working very hard. It looks like they got a lot of power, right? But we also know historically that's also not true, right? The lower classes in societies almost always have the least amount of power. Two, the third estate supported the first and second estates. I mean, I use that exact language, right? They're supporting the other estates with their taxes and with their labor, with their work. The first estate supported the third estate? No, they're all there by themselves. The estates share power equally? The third estate's being crushed by the other estates, right? So we know it's two. It stands out. It's right there. You need to know it. Absolutely. Okay. What was one effect of the historical development? Okay, so now some of you are going to read choice one and you're going to go, aha, the king was overthrown. You told me his head got chopped off. That's the answer. But let's read the whole choice. It says, and communism was introduced. Okay. Not true, right? We're not going to talk about communism until during World War I. Well, the Industrial Revolution, but communism actually existing in countries until World War I. The king became an enlightened despot and a totalitarian government was created. No, he did not become anything. He became decapitated. He became dead. So that's wrong. 3, a republic was established and the king was beheaded. Got his head chopped off by guillotine. So that's what we're going to look at, but we're always going to read every choice. A directory was formed and the king maintained his power. He maintained nothing. He maintained nothing, not even his head. So it is absolutely 3. So there we go. Okay. So you should be kind of following along, jotting down notes. You can always pause me. That's something you can't do in real life. People have tried. All right, let's do the Industrial Revolution next. Another big theme, a whole lot of enduring issues involved here too. We have inequality between social classes. We have conflict. We have a human interaction with the environment, with all that pollution we have going on and all the stripping of natural resources we see, right? Change could work. All that sort of stuff. That absolutely works here with the Industrial Revolution, a bunch of different parts of this. So before the Industrial Revolution, the domestic system or cottage industry, textiles were made in the home. It was small scale production, not mass produced. So things were generally more expensive. You didn't buy a whole bunch of stuff because you didn't have enough money because it was more expensive. There was fewer of it, supply and demand. There's not a lot of supply. Price will go up. After the Industrial Revolution, goods are mass produced in factories, so prices go down. So basically, I just said what the Industrial Revolution is, right? It's things go from being produced in the home, small scale. Textiles is the first Industrial Revolution. Textiles is cloth. And then after the Industrial Revolution, mass produced in factories. Now, the textile industry is where it starts. The cloth industry, the clothing industry is where the Industrial Revolution starts. It obviously expands to a whole bunch of other things as well. Okay, why does it begin in Great Britain? Well, the biggest thing is natural resources, right? They've had maps on the Regents exam before that have coal mine locations and where the first cities developed. Gee, they're right next to each other, almost like those cities formed near and the factories formed near the coal mines, right? They did on purpose. Resources dictated where all the major cities of England are. Okay, so we have Adam Smith right in The Wealth of Nation, laissez-faire. So if you see Adam Smith writing about laissez-faire, hands off. The government shouldn't interfere. Guys, if you see laissez-faire, you just need to know what it is. They're not going to tell you. It's a term you should know. Laissez-faire, hands off. The government shouldn't interfere in the economy. And a result of this is number two. Okay. A result of this is number two. Working conditions suck. Okay, they're bad. Living conditions suck. There are long hours. There are low wages. The jobs are dangerous. If you got hurt on the job, you could lose your job. There's pollution everywhere. If you were in my class, we watched that series on the cholera epidemic with the sewage getting into the water and cholera spreading throughout London, that disease spreading. Ooh, human environment interaction. Ooh, spread of disease. That's an enduring issue, right? So all of that stuff worked. Now, this next part here is about results of the Industrial Revolution. So let's just real quick, whoop, that was supposed to circle this whole last part, but that did not happen. I don't even know what's going on now. Whoa. Karl Marx sees these conditions and he's like, this cannot last. The communist revolution is going to happen. Okay. And he says that the revolution is going to be violent revolution. Go ahead and write that down. Karl Marx says there will be a violent revolution. All social classes will disappear, right? That's going to happen, he says. And because of that, okay, and here it is. Violent revolution. I guess you didn't need to write it down there because I forgot I put it here. But he says history is class struggle. The bourgeoisie or the middle class, really the factory managers and owners are exploiting the proletariat. That means working class. I told you that in the previous part, but write it here if you want. And eventually this is going to be violent. And I give you characteristics of that. Why do I keep saying it's going to be violent? Because a lot of times they'll say a question like if they have a quote from Marx, it'll be like, what did Marx say would happen as a result of this description? Or even just something about the poor conditions, any document. And then they're like, what did Karl Marx say would happen as a result? And they'll be like, oh, governments would pass reforms. No, violent revolution. There will be an overthrow of the system. Know that. Okay? Know that. I here give you a difference between a command economy and a market economy. Do I need to give it to you here? No, but I thought it was a good place because it's the difference between Adam Smith, government leaves it alone, law of supply and demand, and the command economy where the government controls. Command communism. This is a good Cold War intro, really. Market economy, capitalism. Okay. All right. So another thing we talked about in this unit, just be aware of, is the Irish potato famine. And I'm actually going to write something else in here that I want you to add that's come up recently. Another result is an increase in Irish nationalism. Okay, so the Irish potato famine causes a mass migration from Ireland. Millions of people starve to death. Know those two things. Know the results, right? One other thing to know, why did it happen? I'll write that in too. Why did it happen? There was a potato blight, which is a disease, and it killed so much of the crop. Now, I'm not even gonna get into the details of like how many potatoes a day the poor ate, but just know so much of the diet was potato because you could plant some potatoes and it had the most calories per square mile of any crop they knew at the time. And so it made sense, right? It cleared up more land for cash crops to make money. And Ireland controlled by Britain, right? So they want to make as much money as possible. One of the other things that's come up occasionally is this idea that the British didn't do enough to help, right? That they didn't do enough to help, and that has come up occasionally as well. Okay, so first thing we do when we get to a source, we always look at the sourcing information. And we look at this one and we says it's from Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto. So we think to what we've already talked about. Why did he write? Because all the workers' lives sucked. The working conditions were awful. The living conditions were awful. And he said, this isn't going to last. You can't treat the majority of people, the vast majority of people, 90-something% of people this bad and have them take it. They are going to violently overthrow the system. That's what will happen. Okay? So now we read the sourcing. Now we're going to read each question, remember. I apparently didn't number that one. My bad. So number 3, Marx and Engels are reacting to changes resulting from. Okay, without reading the choices. And I know you're like, didn't you create this packet? I did, but I created this sheet so long ago, I don't remember what questions I picked, right? I'm going to guess it's the Industrial Revolution is the answer. Why? Because I know that's what he was writing about. The result of industrialization or results of the Industrial Revolution. Like, I just know that. Now, I'm not going to read any of the choices, so I don't know if I'm right, but I'm going to read the passage. What action did Marx and Engels predict would change the conditions described in the passage? Okay, could be anything. Could be anything. But as I think about the things I talked about, he's writing about things being really bad for workers after the Industrial Revolution, and this can't last. They're going to violently overthrow the system, set up a classless society. Communism will result, although that would be too easy because it's the Communist Manifesto. But I just think about what I know. Now I'm going to read the passage. Now that I know what I'm reading for. Owing to the extensive use of machinery and the division of labor, the work of the proletarians has lost all individual character and consequently all charm for the workman. He becomes an appendage or an accessory of the machine, and it is only the most simple, most monotonous, most easily acquired knack or skill that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation or reproduction of his race. But the price of a commodity and also his labor is equal to the cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay, more, in proportion as the use of machinery and the division of labor increases, in the same proportion, the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation or stretching of the working hours, by the increase of the work exacted at a given time, or by increased speed of machinery. Okay, if you got lost in that document, I don't blame you, but just dial in as best you can. But just know, get out of the document everything you can, but don't feel like you need to get everything out of the document, right? Because you don't need everything. In fact, you don't need that much at all. In fact, if you get through and are like, man, he talked about wages going down and work going up. Okay, that might be good enough. Let's look at our questions. Marx and Engels are reacting to changes resulting from 1, imperialism, 2, nationalism, 3, industrialization. See, we thought before we read the passage, okay, what do I know about Marx and Engels? He was writing about the Industrial Revolution, and I see that answer, and I'm like, that's it. Democratization. Yep, it's 3. What action did Marx and Engels predict would change the conditions described in this passage? Okay, implementation of reforms, violent revolution. Adoption of laissez-faire policies, violent revolution. The use of passive resistance, violent revolution. Revolts by the working class, violent revolts. That sounds way more violent than passive resistance or the government leaving it alone or implementing reforms, right? Revolts by the workers. As long as you remember those things, that you could have gotten this answer theoretically without understanding the passage at all, just knowing Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto said, working conditions are bad because of the Industrial Revolution. Workers aren't going to take it anymore, and they're going to violently overthrow it. Okay, next thing. Let's do the age of imperialism quickly. I'll try not to take too long on this one. Okay. Why did imperialism happen? M&Ms. Whoop, I can type. Markets and materials. The Industrial Revolution, we just talked about it. I thought about stopping our review with this today, but I really wanted to make sure that we talked about the age of imperialism right after industrialization. Industrialization, I always talk about it like this in class. It doesn't do me any good to be able to mass produce things in factories if I don't have enough raw materials to make that much stuff, or I don't have enough markets or places to sell that much stuff. Okay, so there's that, and then nationalism. Those are the 2 big ones. The ethnocentrism piece, absolutely, as well, which we'll talk about. But nationalism, the need for raw materials and markets, and nationalism. My country is better than yours, therefore, I am going to have more colonies than you. Okay. Um, we'll go to the next thing. I'm going to get rid of that right now. Okay. The Berlin Conference. You just need to know what this is. It has come up on the exam a weird amount. That's where they divided up Africa. Who is they? Europe. When we say the age of imperialism, it's the European age of imperialism. Okay. So the Berlin Conference is where Europe divides up Africa. Just know that, and we'll talk about it again in our review when we talk about more modern day, like 1990s and after, ethnic conflict, where they just drew up random boundary lines and didn't pay attention to what groups ended up in a country together, even if they hated each other. Be familiar with examples of nationalism. I'm not going to go into detail about the Sepoy Mutiny, but you should see it. If you see Sepoy or Sepoy Mutiny, nationalism. Just know it, think it. Okay. Why is it nationalism? Because they're revolting against foreign control. There's two definitions of nationalism: pride in your country, we're awesome, and basically wanting self-rule, wanting to control yourself, not wanting to be controlled by outsiders, other people. Okay, so let's look quickly at India. Britain goes on and on and on about we did good stuff. And there are railroads, there's a telegraph system, there's a postal system, but all that stuff wasn't to be nice to India. It was to help Britain control India. So India is able to use that stuff when they gain independence, but it's not like that's why the British did it, right? And the one thing I want to point out is this cash crop economy. Money, markets, materials. The British set up a cash crop economy and it cripples the Indian economy. And it's one of the things that Gandhi will target in his independence movement. Okay. Again, nationalism, just recognize these guys' names. Simon Bolivar is that. Toussaint Louverture, he's the guy who starts a revolt in Haiti. Nationalism again. And they're all inspired by the French and American Revolution and the ideas of the Age of Enlightenment. Okay. Canal shortened trade routes, know that. Okay. I think this is coming up on one of the questions. I'm just going to peek ahead to tell you again. I wanted you to see me reacting to questions. Yep. Okay. I'm going to wait to talk about it in a minute. The Opium Wars, a lot of times, if there's a document, and I see there was one in a minute, which we'll talk about, if there's a document about the Opium Wars, what they'll often ask about is the second question is, what was the impact of the events described in this letter or document? And it's that China is carved up into spheres of influence, or that China signed unequal treaties, or that China was controlled by European powers. You just need to know that. Another example of nationalism there. If you see the word Meiji at all, if you see Meiji at all, Meiji is M, modernize is M. Meiji is modernize, westernize. They modernize and westernize Japan. They don't isolate Japan, they do the opposite. So when at the beginning of the course, we talked about the Tokugawa shogunate. They isolate Japan. After this happens, the Meiji Restoration, a modernizing or a westernizing of Japan. M Meiji, M modernize, westernize. Modernize and westernize, and really industrialize. Those three words in this class are interchangeable. Modernize, westernize, industrialize. Okay, so here's the thing. If you, at any point on your exam, see a letter to Queen Victoria, it is about the Opium Wars. Now, if that's not enough of a clue for you, I will tell you, I know this letter. It shows up on the exam a weird amount. It literally talks about opium in it. So there you go. So it says the purpose of this letter. I know the purpose because I know what this letter is, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to cheat like that. And what is a long-term result? Hey, it's what I told you the second question always will be on the Regents exam. Weird. So we know that we're reading what's the purpose. So we should be able to get that right from the document, really. So now let's take time. I have heard you are kind, compassionate monarch. I am sure that you will not do to others what you yourself do not desire. I have heard you instructed every British ship that sails for Canton to not bring any prohibited goods to China. It seems that your policy is enlightened as it is proper. The fact that British ships have continued to bring opium to China results perhaps from the impossibility of making a thorough inspection of all of them owing to their large numbers. So again, I heard you prohibited certain prohibited goods from coming to China. The fact that opium's still being brought to China, I am sending this letter to reiterate the seriousness with which we enforce the law and make sure that merchants from your honorable country will not attempt to violate it again. Stop bringing opium to China. But the British merchants made a lot of money from it. M&M, Marketed Materials. So the purpose is, hey, stop the flow of opium into China. There it is right there. Yeah, for the British to stop the flow. What is the long-term result? The British were forced to pay reparations? Nope. The Chinese government closed all ports? That didn't happen either. The British forced China to sign unequal treaties. Yeah, they ended up in war. They lost, and they had to sign these unequal treaties. Why is it unequal? Because all the good things the British got, all the bad things China had to do. So there we go. And they did not respect sovereignty. They carve it up into spheres of influence. Okay, next. I don't know why it won't go. Oh, because that's the last stage. Okay, so there you go. There's way more we could do, and we're going to be coming across questions in review like that. But again, a lot of the content we cover is going to be done in this format. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do any of this, but it's here for you to either do week to week, which I'd recommend, or to do in those days after class is over as you're preparing for the exam.